Hello, today we're going to talk about INTJ and courage. So recently, Bill Belichick and Nick Saban, both football coaches, one in NFL and one in college, have both retired. I look up their personality types. They're both INTJs. I also know one of my favorite coaches, Greg Popovich, is INTJ. And so that made me think if you also look up some of the technology leaders, there are a lot of them are INTJs. So that made me think, why are there so many leaders that are INTJs? There are obviously a lot of people in the world, and a lot of leaders are not INTJs. But what made INTJs quote unquote special and suited for being leaders? And recently, I'm also watching a Chinese drama called The Story of Minlan. It is a Chinese ancient drama. It is one of the most popular Chinese dramas in 2018. In fact, it has some overseas success. It's like most popular Chinese drama in Korea, and it spreads popularity to Western US as well. And so I only started recently watching it. Their main character, Min Lan, is also a INTJ. The thing that stood out most to me about Min Lan is her courage. And so let's talk about INTJ and courage. So a few instances of courage. When her good friend was giving birth, the friend's nemesis in the story took away the doctors, and Min Lan couldn't care less and just took a sword, then asked to let them release the doctor to help her friend. When someone was trying to poison her grandma, who she cared and loved deeply and grew up with, she could have just let it kind of go away and not ask like who did that, and not really try to find the truth, because that has all the consequences of her family. She did not do that, and instead she made a big deal out of it and tried to find the truth, even though the truth has all kinds of consequences to the safety of their family, right? When her husband was accused of murdering someone, actually, her husband is a very good person. Um, she had a choice. She could have divorced her husband, and many people around her told her to divorce her husband. Um, but in that critical moment, she decided to stick with her husband, even though all the people around her recommend that's the best thing for her child, for her newborn child. Because if her husband gets the bad reputation, that reputation will carry over to her son, right? So she chose not to do that and instead being with the husband. So in each one of those examples, when she's under duress, it seems to me that she's not choosing the path that is the most strategic. She's acting emotionally, and so that's very interesting. So what happened to the strategic side of INTJ? That's congruent with strategizing, being able to subdue her feelings and execute according to what is of the highest interest. Okay, so so that's the context. Um, I think that INTJs do that because that's precisely the point. When it comes to leadership, there are so many choices you can make, and you need. It's important to have a good prioritization framework, and a lot of times, as a leader, you look at a situation, especially when the things are not going well. Um, it's really important to decide what's important, and then you fix the variables that are important. You take those variables off and say these are non-negotiable, and then everything else is quote unquote negotiable. And so in Minlan's case, what's not negotiable is standing up for her friend. Justice is non negotiable. The other thing that's non negotiable is finding the truth, right? Finding the murder or the attempted murder of her grandmother. And then the other last thing that's non negotiable is sticking together in a marriage, right? And so, like, Story of Milan is definitely one of my favorite Chinese TV dramas of all time. Um, and what stood out to me is Milan's courage to um, the messiest the situation. Her decisions tend to be um, not the smartest, but that's what makes it admirable, because her decision becomes quote unquote dumber, but they are all because of her sense of value and duty. So I really like that. All right. So so let's go back to the original topic. Why are there so many leaders? And there are a lot of technology leaders actually are INTJs. And so, you know, when shit hits the fan, INTJ doesn't look at a situation of like, how do I solve this problem? Not necessarily. They do that, but it's more like the messier the problem, they look at it and say, okay, what's important to me? What is the value that I want to preserve out of this messy situation? And as long as I act that way, I will be fine either way. I will be fine with the result. Either I lose or I win, but I'm fine because I live according to my principles. Now that's the mature INTJ. If you're not mature, then all bets are off. I have a few stories about this. So the first story is when I was trying to quit my job. One what I actually decided to quit my job for about a year and a half before I actually quit my job to become an entrepreneur. Toward the end of that period, my friend actually sat me down and I said, I'm making good income in my current job. I don't know the risks if I quit. I kind of want to just do still moonlight on this startup thing of mine. And he said that when every time when your back was against the wall, you tend to do better. Um, I didn't realize what that really meant, but I think that has been true. Um, I'm in general pretty strategic person, and usually when the things get really tough, somehow I actually found a way to be even better. Even though that during that time I could be a little bit emotional. So this is my personal anecdote, right? And then so that's the first example. The second example is during the Y Combinator. Um, so in YC, they bring a bunch of like founders from all over the place. And one time, Stripe founders came to speak. And one of the questions to the Stripe founders was, what makes a good leader? And they said something very interesting. They said, sometimes being a good leader just means you have courage. That I never really understood what that means. And I think only more and more do I get what that means. Is a lot of times as leaders, you need to make some controversial decisions, and it's important to know what fuels that decision. Is that trying to appease everyone? Is that trying for your personal gain? Is that you because during chaos all things are off, right? So like your true self kind of came out, or in bad times, the thing that you value comes out the most. Okay, and that really determines a person. The third example I'll give is last year, the whole commercial real estate was in shambles, right? Interest rates skyrocketed in such a unprecedented speed of increase. All the commercial real estate businesses got affected and got affected dramatically, and our business was no exception. And that was not a easy, 9 to 12 months. And if I were to do it all over again, I don't even know if I want to do that again. Okay. But I also know that last year I made a bunch of decisions. And I felt like I was under a lot of stress, and it felt like the decisions were emotional. Now looking back, I think I don't regret any one of those decisions. And even the way I executed may not be good, but I think the decisions themselves were the right thing and they were a reflection of my values. So it taught me that when times are tough, I am most true to my values. Okay? It might look emotional, but they are actually the most genuine parts of me, which is, when people get drunk, that their true self came out. And I'm saying that in the business, when things get really stressful, their true self also came out. All right. So So that's the character. So for INTJs, when things are get tough, they get a little bit more emotional. And so here's a tangent. I don't think INTJs are good poker players. I also know within myself that the reason I like playing poker is that it's not that I like the skill set of poker. I like poker because when things are not going well, I do find myself getting emotional. I tilt more than a typical person when the things are not going well. And so why is that? And why is that they quote unquote make better leaders? If you look at all the best poker players in the world, like Phil Ivey, Tom Dwan, and so let me just put up this page. So, you know, Phil Ivey, ISTP, Tom Dwan, INTP, right? Phil Galfond, INTP, um, Daniel Negreanu, ENTP, right? There are a lot of ISTP, INTP, and ENTPs in poker, and I think that's because they introverted thinking is one of their most top two functions, right? And introverted thinking is not part of INTJ. And so, what does that mean? Let's take ISTP. So, ISTP lead with introverted thinking. Their secondary function is extroverted sensing, and then their third function is introverted intuition, right? Kobe Bryant is ISTP. A lot of poker players are ISTP. And so what that means is that, so here's what I believe. When things are tough, your third function is what ultimately drives a human being. Okay? Like when things are really, really bad, your third function is the child. That is the one that kind of comes out and make subtly make the decisions. Okay? For ISTP, their third function is introverted intuition, right? And introverted intuition is like seeing the future. So in a very competitive, NBA finals, the ISTPs such as like Kobe and in a poker game, Phil Ivey, when they are stressed, their introverted intuition becomes stronger than ever before. They can predict the future, they can see where everyone is going, their next move. They can basically, in a heightened sense of awareness, they get better than anyone else. Their third function comes out. Whereas INTJs, when they get super stressed, their introverted feeling comes out. Okay? This is my theory, like all of this is just like talking. There's no scientific evidence to it. So, what's no what's the lesson here? So the lesson here is I have observed that if you look at the successful tech leaders, a lot of them are INTJs. So that's one. And in order to be leaders, you need to display courage in times of duress. Okay, so that's the second point. And I am arguing that their ability to showcase courage comes from their third slot, the INTJs, which is the introverted feeling. Well, there are many ways to show courage, just to be clear. And I'm just arguing that INTJs that may have come from their third slot. And the way they prioritize making decisions during times of stress is they figure out what is non-negotiable, and then everything else becomes a strategic move. Okay. But the thing they don't strategize is what is the core value. Like they don't strategize about that. For the same reason that Ming Nan doesn't strategize like, hey, should I be kind to my grandmother or should I stick with my husband? Like they don't make that as they're black and white on that value. Okay, so they fix those variables, and then everything else leads up to strategy, which is like because that also says that not everything can be strategized. You have to hold certain things as invariants in your life, and those are the things that you hold dear to heart. Which is that's what I admire Minlan for that. Okay, and I also see that, and that may be why there are a lot of INTJs being leaders. I'm not saying there are other types cannot be leaders. There's so many leaders in the world, and I'm just most familiar with my type. So this is a video mostly for INTJs that want to be leaders, and they might be listening. I think my advice is when you are stressed, don't be too critical of yourself that you may be making bad decisions or emotional decisions that are unlike yourself. But I think that is good. That's your true self. And maybe something to tell myself is, yeah, I might be making appearing emotional when times are when things are stressed. But in retrospect, I do think the way you make decisions can always be improved. The way you execute the decisions, but whether the decision is the correct one is orders of magnitude more important than how you execute it. If that makes sense. So if you're gonna make a decision A versus B, that's more important than like, okay, once I made the decision A and I know ultimately that turned out to be the right thing, you may have carried it slightly, not correctly, but that you can learn. But the whether A or B, choosing A or B, that's the more important one. So good job on that if you make correct decisions. Anyway, I think that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and until next time. Bye bye.